He's a senior analyst with the Forest Resource Inventory Unit of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resource and Forestry. So Murray started his career in '83 with the Ontario Forest Research Institute. He participated in growth and yield modeling for Ontario's southern, central, and boreal forest regions. So he's a senior analyst since 2008 and works with a team exploring the utility of LiDAR technology and multiband digital image analysis in the development of an enhanced forest inventory at the stand and individual tree level. So Murray is going to talk about the use of LiDAR in industry in Ontario.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity of coming to beautiful Quebec City to give this talk today. And all I can say is congratulations, Quebec. You guys are just, heading up the hill of a roller coaster, and it's going to be a real fun time when we get to the top now that you have this technology in hand. What I'd like to talk about today is some challenges and some successes about using LiDAR technology for forest inventory. I'm going to be the science geeky guy a little bit, so I kind of have a double whammy. You just had lunch, so you really kind of want to nod off, and I'm going to kind of talk about some detailed stuff that you haven't seen today, but I wanted to share with you because I think you're going to learn about these things more going forward. What I like to talk about, maybe, is a project that's called the Advanced Forest Resource Inventory Technologies, and Doug Pitt is my co-lead on the project with the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre, and I've also had the pleasure of working with Margaret Petter over the last decade or so on growth and yield models, and more recently on the LiDAR side. It's actually been a decade since we started this opportunity with LiDAR, and literally we were crawling in 2004, 2005 when I got my first point cloud, and we heard about the fact that the point cloud has a lot of information and is data heavy. Well, I was on my hands and knees at that time trying to find software to analyze it. There wasn't the great array of tools we have available now, like LAS tools and LTK and the R packages to handle the LAS data. You were basically forced to write your own code to be able to work with this data. And that's changed so much. So we started playing with LiDAR in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest. And when I say the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, I'm not sure how translatable that is to you in Quebec, but I'm talking about tolerant hardwood stands, white pine, red pine stands, where partial harvesting is generally conducted. And I'll use the term boreal forest, where I'm talking more about the black spruce, jack pine, fire origin stands, and where clear cutting is generally practiced. So I'm going to use those terms a lot today. And in 2007, we started looking at, in 2005, 2006, we played with LiDAR in boreal situations and in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence situations and said, will they kind of work in these forests? And surprisingly, the little studies we did, they actually performed quite well. Well, in 2007, and even in 2016, LiDAR cost is an issue, and people always hear about LiDAR, and the first thing is they go, oh, it's way too expensive, we can't have it. I think there's the other side of the question is maybe we can't afford not to have it, and I think you're going to learn that, and you've already seen demonstrations today from the talks from the forest industry side, how it helps them make better decisions. Well, in 2007, flying LiDAR at above 1 point per square meter was, you just couldn't even think about that. And so we didn't know at that time whether if we flew at 1 point per square meter or if we flew at 10 points per square meter, heaven forbid we could do it or afford it, would we get better answers? Well, generally the answer is no. From the type of modeling I'm going to talk about today, you can do a lot with very low density LiDAR densities. However, the reality is today you probably couldn't pay a vendor to give you 1 point per square meter because their ability, because technology has expanded, they can provide you with much higher densities now as their regular course of business. So we played with looking at what's that optimal density that we need for forest inventory prediction. In 2009, 2010, we started on trying to actually implement a forest inventory up in the Romeo Ouellette Forest boreal forest around Timmins, if you know Ontario, on Tembex limits. In 2010, 2012, we actually pushed that a little bit more, and we went on to looking at a larger forest, again in the boreal, but we tried to really do a good job of inventory this time. When we played in the Romeo and Millette in 2010, we kind of accidentally implemented an inventory. We were working with plots that already existed on the ground. We used that information to build our models and apply them. And we did a really good job of predicting models for mature stand conditions. What we didn't do is that full array of age classes, if you were, from 2 meters up to 30 meters tall, which we did when we moved to this next forest on the Hearst Forest. We've also looked at trying to play with image point clouds. I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end, just to show you what maybe the future has in that area. And we also looked at trying to expand, instead of just predicting things like height and volumes, can we predict piece size, which is another piece that we need from the industrial side, but also from the habitat supply modeling, where we want to know forest structure. In 2013, we took all we learned from the boreal and we moved back to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, which is a very different beast. I'm going to talk a little about that. And I'm going to talk about the validation that we've done. Because what I want to try to provide today is confidence to you that when you see people up here showing you rasters of volume predictions, that they're actually good predictions. So we're talking about the boreal models. We're basically looking at, when we're basically looking at the red area is the Hearst, that's a 1 million hectare forest, and the green area is the Romeo and Millette forest, both Tembec forests, 635,000 hectares there. And so we're looking at those boreal forest species of jack pine, black spruce, white spruce, of course, mixed woods. We're looking at wall-to-wall coverage of the LiDAR at densities of around 0.5 point to 1 point per square meter. That was sort of the operational level of LiDAR we were playing with. We're going to talk about area-based forest model predictions. So we're going to make raster predictions on a 20 by 20 meter cell. That's going to be the unit of currency that we're going to use. And again, the thing to remember with these forest types, of course, is the clear cutting is our way of emulating natural disturbances on those forests. And so when we look at comparing our volume estimates, it's pretty easy to do such. These are the rasters that were produced. So we're looking at 20 meter by 20 meter raster across those forest types for a whole array of different forest inventory attributes. To get technical, we tried different types of modeling. Being statistician types, we like regression modeling. We use something called seemingly unrelated regression, so it models everything at one time to minimize errors. I know, way too much detail. The other thing we tried was this non-parametric method of random forest, which I personally do like, that allows us that basically a black box approach, going through a bunch of decision trees to come up with the most appropriate answer for a given cell. And when we did the comparisons of these two different approaches, and this is looking at predicting basal area on the Hearst forest, black bars are the mean of the plots for that given forest type on the bottom, low-lying conifer, mixed woods, jack pine, intolerant hardwoods, jack pine, spruce, and so on. You can see that the green bars represent a regression approach, and the orange bars represent the random forest, this non-parametric approach, and generally there's very little difference at all, if any, between the modeling types. And that opened up an awful lot of opportunities, because when you're using a non-parametric model like random forest, this technique, you don't have to have species-specific models. You don't have to have an existing inventory layer to apply them to. So if you want to use a jack pine model, you would have to apply it to a jack pine stand, but you would have to know that that's a jack pine stand spatially on your inventory layer. The reality is that within that jack pine stand, it may have been typed 70% jack pine, 30% aspen. There are pockets of aspen in that stand, but you don't know where to apply the aspen model because all you know is the jack pine stand. The non-parametric model approach allows us to actually custom predict for each cell of LiDAR in the forest. It's actually very quick. For the Hearst forest, for all those surfaces there, it took my laptop computer 24 hours to produce from start to end for 11 or 12 different inventory attributes. But when you're using non-parametric techniques, you have to go and sample the full range of LiDAR conditions, Unlike regression models, you can't extrapolate. You have to sample it in order for random forest to make a prediction towards it. But we're a pretty scared bunch of people when it comes to this approach because we're not in much control at all. Basically, it happens in a black box and the answer comes out of the other end. I'm coming to grips with that now because the answers seem to be so good. So I just sort of close my eyes now. This examples, this is your one-to-one graphs on the right-hand side. The dots are supposed to be all on that 45-degree line. As you can see, there's variation around that. You're seeing different regression models of random forest outputs. That list on the left-hand side is what we predict through our regular project. Now, one thing I didn't say at the beginning, this is a research and development thing. Ontario is not in Quebec situation right now. We do not have wall-to-wall LiDAR being flown. The only LiDAR that's being flown on these large extents are actually industrial-owned LiDAR, so Tembec being one of the main companies that's involved with this. However, we're still keeping up the R&D side to be ready so if we have opportunity to do it. And so again, we can provide all those full things that usually we have to generate from yield curves. In Ontario right now, we can actually predict reach 20 by 20 meters of the forest. This is a quick example, and Sebastian Lacroix, who presented earlier, was actually part of this work. In looking at Tembec on the Romeo Millet forest, we said, okay, here's a LiDAR prediction for these stands, and here's a planning yield curve estimate for the stands for these 12 harvest blocks. And I sort of color-coded them. Green is basically means the predictions within 10% or less. The red is over 10%. And you can see on the left-hand side the stands, or the blocks, that are in red. You can see a lot more red on the left-hand side than you do on the LiDAR prediction side. On the ones that you do see LiDAR actually over-predicting, these were actually photo interpretation errors where the wrong leading species was given to the stand, and therefore the wrong regression model at that time was applied to that stand. And so therefore we have the difference. But overall, we're looking at a difference going from, for those 12 blocks, 14.5% to being within 5%. So Tembec was thrilled with this ability to come much closer to the volumes. Shift gears now. We're going to go to the partial harvesting stands of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, and the world has changed. We're not talking about clear cutting there. We're basically looking at partial harvesting systems. So we have uniform shelterwood in the red pine, white pine forest, and we have a small amount of clear cutting, but the majority is selection, single tree management in hardwoods, and the shelterwood. The way we built the models in the boreal is we went and sampled a tree species, a forest type, jack pine or black spruce, and we tried to cover a range of heights and or ages. But to do that, we basically have maybe 6 to 8 species. Once we get to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, we're 17, 18, 20 different species. So it's cost prohibitive to try to do the same type of sampling. So when we got to the Petawawa Research Forest, we looked at letting the LiDAR tell us where to put the plots. And so this is a 10,000 hectare forest. And basically, we upped the cell size to a 25 by 25 meter raster cell this time because we're dealing with larger trees, bigger crowns, and in a 20 by 20, you could have a few too many trees to work with. But we basically said, okay, doing a principal components analysis, explaining sort of where the majority of the variation is, we sampled on 2 axes, we did a 10 by 10 matrix, and I went and told the crews where to put the plots. Irrespective of species, irrespective of silvicultural system. I was just saying the LiDAR shows us that there's a range of conditions, and in order to do a non-parametric random forest solution, I want to make sure I cover from roads. Yes, I actually put plots on roads, or I actually put plots on roads with 1 tree in them versus fully stocked, 35-meter white pine trees that, carrying 600, 800 cubic meters of volume. So that full range is sampled. Because we tend to do not want to sample those edge effects, right? We tend to always stay away from that. And yet we have a whole landscape with a lot of edges. And unless we sample them, we can't predict them. And so we did that. I want to sort of show you some results of that. Here is on the Petawawa Research Forest, the same one-to-one line, same sort of suite of predictors. You notice a wider variation around that. We're predicting all species here. So we're not handling just one species as we were before. But again, that same sort of relationship's present. But really what it all comes down to, okay, there's some greater variation around that one-to-one line. But if I go to harvest a stand, or if I was in my planning process, I expected to go over that hill and I had a white pine, red pine stand that was supposed to have 450 cubic meters. gross merchantable volume, I don't want a surprise. So does LiDAR remove that surprise? And we learned that it did in the boreal. Does it happen in the Great Lakes? So one of the challenges in the Great Lakes is, as I mentioned, we don't do clear cutting. So in the boreal, where we could sort of take scaling returns and sort of fudge with the numbers a bit to deal with what wasn't harvested, what was run over, what never made it to the landing. Here, we basically are only removing a certain portion of the stand with each renewal. So what we did is we bit the bullet this time, and we implemented a 50-meter grid sampling in 19 stands. And so I had some unhappy crews this summer that went through and spent their life doing prism sampling every 50 meters. And we covered the full range of forest conditions that were, at least the dominant forest conditions that are managed in the Petawawa Forest, to give us a validation data set. And so here's an example. So here's false color imagery. This is stand 463. It's a tolerant hardwood stand, but one could call it a mixed wood stand if you think to a boreal context. So there's a whole range of species in there. What I want to focus on is the blue is the cruise summary, and then this is the LiDAR prediction. So for basal area, we're talking merchantable basal area, 9.1 centimeters and greater. I cruised and I got 29. LiDAR said 30.4. And up in the green box is the percent difference, and here's the absolute difference between the two numbers. Again, here's the quadratic mean diameter. It's the tree of average basal area. Think about the average diameter of the stand, 23.5. LiDAR says 24.9. 211 for gross merchantable volume, 206. 289 gross total, 291.8. Not too shabby. I had a lot of pretty happy people all of a sudden. And again, you've seen this in other talks when Neil did before. You also get a map of the variation. So in this one here, I'm looking at the quadratic mean diameter. So there's a range of diameters in those stands. There's a range of volumes. There's a range of BA in those stands. And so this is kind of that information that LiDAR provides for you. And from an operational sense, you can aggregate those. These are like 2 centimeter BA classes and 25 square meter or cubic meter volume classes. From an operational sense, it's way too fine. But again, you get that information. However, in order to manage these stands, we actually need to have size class information. So in the boreal, we actually were able to recover 2 centimeter diameter classes for the jack pine stands, and Daniel shows one from JDI, where you basically can predict that resolution. That's a little bit too fine in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence. What we actually manage by is size classes. We have poles, so it's 10 to 24 centimeters, small, medium, and large sawlogs. And so this top graph shows you in the blue was the cruise summary. So on the 59 plus that went in that 14 hectare stands, this was what we said that the BA distribution looked like. And this was the LiDAR predictions for each of those based on what I call 232 plots. Where basically you've enumerated every piece of that stand. And so if you think of the LiDAR as plots, based on those plots, this is what the comparison would be. So, pretty close. So what we basically would do would be tree marking of those stands. And what we did is we then, after the tree marking was done, we sent what normally we do is we have an audit of the tree marking. So we basically have somebody go in and audit the marking, and they came back with some tallies that showed us what was actually being removed by their sample. And so this red bar says that 4.6 square meters of BA is going to be removed in the poles, 2 in the smalls, 0.9 in the medium, a little bit in the large. So a total of 8.5 is going to be removed of BA, leaving a residual of 22 in that stand. So I have a piece of BA, but we need to get what's that volume? What can I expect in volume? So a new thing that we added this year was predicting this VBar relationship, which is the volume per unit basal area. And it actually models quite well, the LiDAR. As you can see, again, it's all species. We're talking roadways in here and everything else. Some of these outlying points are those. We took that information, and for amount of BA, we can then predict how much volume is coming out. So the gray bar is what the LiDAR says is going to come out in volume. The orange bar is what, taking these individual trees that were tallied as part of the marking audit, would come out. Bottom line is, we're doing all right. So here's an application of the LiDAR into a partial harvesting system, how to sort of make that connection. I want to quickly just show you another example. This is in a pine one. So here, again, the same layout, same comparisons, 28 to 28.7, 30 to 31, 292, 287. Again, some good correlation of what the cruising got, which I admit is not 100% census, but it's all I can afford on a 50-meter grid. We're pretty sure that those numbers are appropriate out there. Again, we see the variation in BA that's expressed in that 25-meter raster. We have a prescription where we want to retain 50% crown closure, and we want to lower that stand down to 16 square meters. So again, we do the same thing. We have a prediction by size class. Here you can see that the LiDAR is a little bit different, and the shape is generally the same, but we're not to the same points on each of the bars. Overall, we're not too bad. Again, we have a marking audit, what's going to come out to try to shoot to that 16 square meter residual basal area. Converting with that VBar to volume. Once again, we're in the same ballpark of what we can expect to harvest going through that LiDAR inventory. Now, it's tempting to only show you good results, but I want to be true. This is an example where it's a white pine, so a red pine, white pine stand. It's a small little block. 20 plots were put in there. This is the canopy height model. And so I want to make sure you understand, I'm not talking about adding up anything about individual trees here. I'm linking that point cloud of information with a field plot. Okay, so I'm predicting things at a 20 by 25 meter area. We're not adding up individual trees. But you can see through this canopy height model, there's quite a few gaps. In fact, when the imagery was flowing, that stand had not had a shelter wood cut. But in 2012, so this was 2009, 2012, this had happened. And this part comes to bear here. So you can see overall, we did a really good job at basal area still. Here, gross merchantable volume, again, 6%, I can live with that. But the size of the trees were hugely different. I had 30% error. I didn't sleep that night. I thought, what the heck is going on here? And what it turns out is in 2009 to 2012 to 2015, there was a lot of wind events that happened, plus there was some mortality that happened. And we have to remember that. These predictions are going to get old, right? So when you have a prediction out there, it's going to maybe be different if you've had something happen in those stands. And basically what it was, in 2012, when we flew the LiDAR, there was a small understory of balsam fir. It was not really detected that well by the LiDAR because it was in that understory. In 2015, when we put the validation plots, balsam fir had moved up to our 9.1 centimeter diameter threshold. We added those into our calibration, our validation plots. And even though it was 8 to 10 trees on the plots, it actually made a difference in the density. So you can see if I add in change that density down to getting rid of those 10 centimeter sized class trees, again, I get much closer to the quad mean diameter. I generally want to be within 10% of every attribute we're trying to predict. So you can see for the 19 stands that we cruise, those dotted lines represent the 10%. We're doing well. I've removed a few plots where those ingrowth were an issue. And again, so the quadratic mean diameter here is all kind of within that 10%. Gross total volume, gross merchantable volume. These are the three stands that were impacted by a 2013 windstorm. And I can't do anything about them. They're in there. And those are things you can expect with these type of inventories as you try to use them over time. However, even so with those, the numbers are reasonable. So this is where we average all those stands together. Here with the blowdown, that wind throw events in there, overall, basal area, the LiDAR predictions were off by 0.4. Quadratic mean diameter, we're off by, this is percent, 1.7. Gross merchantable volume, 1.4. Gross total volume, 3.7. The folks managing the Petawawa Research Forest were thrilled that they had numbers that were working out that well. If I look at removing those hardwood stands, had the blowdown, the numbers change a little bit better in terms of being unbiased with the predictors. Again, we're pretty happy with the numbers that we've been able to generate for that forest. I want to finish up with messages I've heard. I don't work for forest industry. I work for the provincial government. Some you've already heard today, and I'm going to probably go over a few different points, but LiDAR-derived inventories are a real game changer. I've heard things like, never before we had this quality of information to plan with. And that planning is a big side, and I'm going to come back to that. This is one that Tembec coined that I really latched onto. It's no surprise forestry. How many people here has an allocation that's set up, but they go over that hill and they're sort of surprised, like, oh, shoot, that's not what the plan said would be there. With this type of information, this information currency, you're not going to be stuck with those situations anymore. We seem to be able to remove that out of the equation for people, because where in the past we did do a lot of cruising, we don't see that happening. Sounds like it's a national thing. We don't have people out cruising these stands. Here's a technique now of actually having some good estimates. Right wood to the right mill at the cheapest cost. I've heard that from industry as well. Now we have the tools to do that. Danielle talked about this earlier. Connects the tactical operational inventories to the strategic level inventories. Isn't it nice to be able to build a strategic level inventory with good information at that operational scale, so you can sort of remove some of those surprises? Reduces wood costs through more efficient harvest block design, and we saw some talks about that today, about shaping the blocks maybe. If you have minimum diameter thresholds and you have the ability to only harvest a certain amount of, a certain size class, you could tailor your blocks that way. Less deferrals, less plan amendments. And in Ontario, there's a huge process for changing where what stand's going to be harvested. There's a huge cost to a forest industry to do that. Match equipment to stand attributes. There's no use sending your largest feller buncher to harvest small wood. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That knowledge to direct the wood to the right mill to maximize return and to also minimize travel. Facilitates information sharing, and we've seen some of that today. So again, in 2005, trying to display this information, process this data was a challenge. Those roadblocks are gone now. We've seen situations where we have feller bunchers with tablets up in front of their faces with areas of concern, riparian areas already mapped out there. Flagging, anybody has stocks and flagging tape, dump them now, because obviously we're going to really hurt that market. We are seeing all kinds of industrial switching from using flagging tape and people. In fact, next point is sort of the road constructions, where road construction layout's a huge cost, huge opportunity for LiDAR to save money with that. In Tembec, in Timmins, it was a challenge to get people who were used to using going out to do road layout to come and look at this new technology, the LiDAR side. And once we had an opportunity to sit them down in front of a computer and actually look at where they wanted to put a harvest road in and say, oh, well, we have slopes, we have, these issues to be aware of, they basically refused to go out anymore to put out their flagging tape for a road until they sat down, played on the DTM, click the waypoints of where the road would go, and go out and do it one time and one day only. And so there's a whole paradigm shift of the operators. So the road layout, the whole idea of that reduced time and layout was also minimize slope, water crossings. We've heard people talk about that today. Maximize block access with your road layout. Reduce that amount of road that's built, because there's a cost to that, and also on maintaining road systems. Piece I glossed over there was a piece that I haven't heard much talk about today, but I see it's a big thing, is in Ontario we have a big species at risk campaign. I know nationally we do. I'm sure in Quebec we have species that wildlife species we have to manage for. LiDAR measures forest structure. One of the most frustrating things that I find is that out of necessity in the past, we've always had to relate age of stands and a structure. Well, we all know that a 30-year-old stand doesn't always look the same. And if we can define the structure that a habitat requires, we can light that structure up spatially and manage it that way. The other point, because I'm renowned for this, is you'll notice that nobody today, and myself included, did not talk about age. None of these predictions rely on age. So one of the biggest sources of error in my inventories in the province comes from age. We can't measure age from photos. We can measure height reasonably well, but if we're off with our age, then our site quality estimates come off. With these predictions, you're basically measuring the structural information that was included in that LiDAR point cloud to make your predictions. You can always add age. We're also using the LiDAR to complement our imagery-based interpretation that goes on right now as well. Predictive hydrology, we've heard people talk about that, using the tools of this high-resolution digital terrain model to predict potential water courses. And there's been some good work with EPI Innovations in the past, Ferric at the time, looking at how well those work. And there's some reports in Tembeck's library, I know, on the Ontario side, that they worked really well in that predictive hydrology side. Skid trail coverage, trying to minimize that with wet area mapping techniques and things like that, where you're looking at trying to reduce rutting. Again, a nice derivative from the digital terrain model. Predictive substrate mapping, so mapping that surficial deposit. We've seen some things about that. In Ontario, we've played with actually predicting on a 10 by 10 meter raster soil texture, substrate depth, and moisture. So we actually have for the Hearst Forest, which is 1 million hectares, that resolution of predicting those attributes. At least the first two. We haven't finalized the third one yet. But with that information, we have that whole productivity side that, again, we're bringing from the LiDAR DTM. Mapping wood fibers. One of the focus of the Canadian Wood Fiber Centre in their work in Ontario, their work with JDI and in Newfoundland, is trying to map wood fiber. So trying to think beyond just volume, actually think about properties. What properties of wood are important, and can we map those spatially? And there's been some great work out of Newfoundland on that front, as well as a little bit in Ontario. Last piece I want to talk about before I get kicked off the stage is the future. And I talked about LiDAR up to now. We heard a little bit earlier this morning about image point clouds. So we have the ability now to make point clouds out of imagery. Because you're looking at a nadir view and a forward view of a pixel, you can actually put it in XYZ space. And these are 3 stands that I showed you earlier. And what we have here across the top, so this is 463. So this is the cruise volume, this is the LiDAR prediction, and this is what's the semi-global matching or image pixel correlation. Again, the same modeling like we do in the LiDAR front. Again, you see how well it works. Does it work as well as LiDAR? No. Is it cheaper than LiDAR? Yes. So potentially, maybe this is going to be a way we update in the future. You guys have the critical piece right now is you have that digital elevation model. That's what makes this whole pixel correlation approach work. You need to be able to normalize those image pixels to a height above ground. And so this could be something in the future. And we've done the same thing with size class distributions as well. With that, I'll take any questions if I've left any time. Thank you.